Stop. Put your hands up so I can see them. I didn't do anything. Don't be smart. You, as always, think that the laws don't apply to you. I'm just going home. Don't play with me. Dark clothes, athletic build. You fit the description. I'm a veteran. So what? Your uniform means nothing here. You're nobody here. In the summer of 2018, Greenville, South Carolina, simmered under thick, sticky heat. The air clung to skin and thoughts alike, draping the town in a lethargy that made everything feel heavier. Streets wound through thick canopies of oak and pine, their shadows offering brief relief from the sun that baked brick facades and sagging porches. In the outer neighborhoods, where sidewalks cracked under roots and houses bore the wear of time, Sophie Johnson lived alone in a modest one-story home. She was 53, tall and composed, with short-cropped hair and a posture that still bore the imprint of military order. Her arms were lean and scarred, the kind of marks that didn't invite questions. A former Special Forces operative, she had spent over a decade in war zones most Americans only saw on news feeds. Now back home, she led a quiet life teaching self-defense to teenagers at a local gym and caring for her aging mother, who had once worked as a school secretary and now moved slowly between rooms with the help of a walker. Sophie rarely spoke about the years in uniform, not about the heat of Kandahar, not about the silence before door breaches, and not about the final mission when she carried a bleeding teammate on her back through sniper fire. The community respected her, nodded at her in grocery stores, invited her to speak at Veterans Day ceremonies, but they kept their distance from the weight she carried. It was easier that way. Only her mother, some nights, caught the shift in Sophie's voice when the news showed another flag-draped coffin or another protest in a distant city, a tremor in tone, a pause too long, the sound of memory returning on a Friday at noon, as the air thickened with pre-storm humidity and cicadas buzzed louder than traffic. Sophie left the pharmacy on Main Street. Her plastic bags were filled with prescriptions, blood pressure meds for her mother, ointments, vitamins. She walked slowly, deliberately, her gaze calm. She wore black joggers and a fitted windbreaker, her hair pulled back tight. Nothing about her was hurried. She didn't hear the siren until it was already upon her. A police cruiser jerked to a stop near the curb outside a regional bank. Tires screeched, dust rose. The door flew open and out stepped Officer Travis Miller, 29, tall, square-jawed, fresh-faced but already hardened by suspicion. He moved quickly, scanning the crowd with a sharp intensity that masked uncertainty. The police scanner had mentioned a possible suspect in the area, black, athletic, dark clothing, near the bank. Sophie, in his mind, matched. He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait. His training, or perhaps his fear, took over. In a blink, he was on her. His hand seized her arm. She turned, startled, the plastic bags twisting in her grip. Before she could speak, she was slammed against the stone wall of the pharmacy. Her body reacted instinctively, tense but still, her back arched from the impact. She didn't resist. She didn't move. Her eyes widened, not in panic but disbelief. Miller yelled something, orders, accusations, incoherent commands. Her medication spilled from the torn bags, bottles rolling into the gutter. The scene unfolded with brutal clarity. The bystanders hesitated. People stared. Some frowned, others stepped back. A teenage girl stopped walking, her fingers hovering over her phone. For 10, maybe 15 seconds, there was no sound but Miller's shouting, Sophie's steady breathing, and the distant hum of traffic. Then, finally, someone raised a camera. A hand, trembling, holding a phone toward the unfolding violence. It was too late. Sophie's face was pressed into the wall. Her arms were forced behind her, her shoulder wrenched at an unnatural angle. Her body shook with each shove. There was no time to explain. She didn't scream. But pain twisted through her torso, her ribs tightening. Her mind fought to stay present. She thought of her mother, probably napping in the afternoon heat. She thought of the gym, the kids she'd promised to meet that evening. She tasted blood in her mouth. The last thing she saw before her vision blurred was the face of a boy across the street, maybe 11, watching in stunned silence, a soda slipping from his hand. Then came the final shove, a jolt of white-hot pain. And then only the sound of the past. Dust, shouting, boots, the familiar echo of violence that never really leaves you. The video surfaced online less than an hour after the incident. A teenage girl, no older than 16, had filmed it from across the street. Her hands had shaken, but the footage was unmistakable. She uploaded it to TikTok with a caption that cut through the digital haze like a blade. "That was my teacher. He didn't ask. He just beat her." Within minutes, the post began circulating first among local users, then regional, and then upward into national attention. By the time dusk settled over Greenville, the video had already reached major media outlets and was airing on network television. Sophie lay in a hospital bed surrounded by white walls and the faint scent of antiseptic. Her ribs were fractured in 2 places. Her concussion was mild but disorienting. The pain pulsed steadily beneath the surface of her skin. Beside her, her mother sat in the hallway, curled forward in a hard plastic chair. Her arms were folded, her eyes closed, but the television mounted near the ceiling kept flashing with images of Sophie's body being pinned to a wall, over and over again. She couldn't bring herself to look. Each time she tried, her fingers dug into her knees, holding back tears that had no words to accompany them. The story refused to fade. In Washington, the capital's steel and glass skyline gleamed beneath an overcast sky. Inside an office perched above the city, General Robert Bailey stared at a muted news segment playing on his wall-mounted monitor. He didn't need sound to recognize her. The profile, the stance, the restraint under pressure, it was unmistakable. Sophie Johnson had saved his life 13 years ago during a night operation near the Syrian border. She had dragged him through mortar fire with a bullet in her leg. Seeing her now, bloodied on American concrete, something twisted deep in his gut. He acted swiftly. Within the hour, 3 encrypted calls left his office. The first went to Ellen Chang, once the Pentagon's top intelligence analyst, now a policy strategist. The second to Lawrence Gray, a grizzled Marine general who had commanded a siege in Mosul. The third to Jose Ramirez, the current head of tactical instruction at the Arizona Military Training Center. Each of them had crossed paths with Sophie. Each owed her something they never spoke of, but never forgot. None of them needed convincing. They moved as a unit, even from across the country. Ellen contacted a civil rights attorney with federal experience. Jose arranged a press liaison to manage incoming media requests. Lawrence pulled strings within the Department of Justice to fast-track an independent inquiry. They issued a joint public statement within 24 hours, signed with their ranks and titles. "We know who she is. We will not let this be buried." By the next morning, the weight of their names had stirred attention in Washington. Congressional aides flagged the case. Journalists dug deeper. The story had shifted from a local incident to a national reckoning. Cable news anchors replayed the footage, overlaying military commendations and headlines. Veteran beaten, hero assaulted, justice for Johnson. Talk shows invited activists and legal experts. Protest signs began appearing in downtown Greenville. People gathered near the pharmacy. The sidewalk where Sophie had fallen turned into a makeshift memorial covered in flowers, notes, and phone screens pointed toward the same viral moment. Meanwhile, Officer Travis Miller declined all interviews. His department issued a brief statement, citing protocol and internal review. His supporters online painted the incident as a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity amplified by emotional overreaction. They spoke of fear, of pressure, of split-second decisions. But the tide was Against them, the footage refused to soften. It replayed with relentless clarity. A woman, 53, unarmed, speaking no words of aggression, was thrown against a wall. The public didn't need commentary. They had eyes. Miller's silence became louder than any statement. His absence from public view fueled speculation. But the bigger shift came not from him, nor even from the growing street protests. It came from the simple, cold momentum of four generals, unified. In military tradition, when multiple high-ranking officers break silence at once, the signal is unmistakable. It is not for attention. It is a call to attention. And the country listened. 2 weeks after the assault, Sophie Johnson was discharged from the hospital. Her bruises had faded to muted purples and yellows, her ribs still tender beneath the support brace. Yet her stride, as she stepped through the sliding glass doors into the open air, was steady. She wore plain clothes, loose around her healing body, and walked beside her mother, who gripped her arm with quiet strength. They were met by a wall of cameras and microphones outside, a crowd of reporters shouting questions she would not answer. She kept her head high, eyes forward. Sophie had never sought to be a symbol, never played the part of hero. She simply walked on. The federal case was opened within days of her release. The charges against Officer Travis Miller were extensive and severe: excessive use of force, assault under color of law, and violation of civil rights under Title 18. The Department of Justice, facing mounting public scrutiny, moved the trial to Columbia, the state capital, citing the need for neutrality and increased security. The courthouse buzzed with reporters, legal teams, and onlookers. Outside, barricades controlled the flow of protesters and supporters. Inside, the tension was palpable. The courtroom was stark, its walls lined with light oak paneling, the air cool under the hum of overhead lights. In the front row sat the four generals, all dressed in civilian attire but unmistakable in bearing. Robert Bailey, Ellen Chang, Lawrence Gray, and Jose Ramirez watched with stony expressions as Sophie took her place at the witness table. Her presence was calm, even serene, a still center in a whirlwind of public attention. Across from her sat Travis Miller, hunched slightly, his face pale, suit wrinkled. His eyes were vacant, like someone trying not to exist. The prosecution began. With clinical precision, the video footage was presented frame by frame. Every shove, every motionless second, every detail of Sophie's restraint was dissected in open court. The medical reports followed: 2 broken ribs, a mild concussion, extensive bruising, psychological trauma. Witnesses testified, bystanders, the teenage girl who filmed, a pharmacist who had seen the aftermath. Each voice added another brick to the growing wall of evidence. Miller's defense leaned on ambiguity. His attorney spoke of fear, of adrenaline, of training under pressure. He argued that Miller had only seconds to act, that the description of the suspect was vague, that the situation unfolded too quickly to assess properly. But the footage contradicted every claim. Sophie had not resisted. She had asked no questions, made no threats. The only escalation came from the uniform. Then, on the second day, Ellen Chang was called to testify. She did not speak with the clipped precision of a soldier, nor the detached objectivity of an analyst. She spoke as a person. She told the court about Sophie in Kandahar, about the extraction under gunfire, about the night she thought she'd never see sunrise until Sophie carried her out through a hail of bullets. Her voice did not tremble. She looked directly at the jury as she concluded that what had happened on that street was not only a crime against one woman, but a blow to everything they had served to protect. The room fell into a heavy stillness. By the end of the third day, there was little left to contest. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their expressions were solemn. The foreman, a middle-aged black woman in a navy blouse, read the verdict aloud. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was clear: 5 years in federal prison, no chance of early parole. Travis Miller showed no reaction. He remained seated, unmoving, his hands resting limply in his lap. His lawyer offered a quiet nod, but no words were exchanged. Sophie did not look at him. She sat with her hands folded, her face expressionless, but her shoulders dropped slightly as if exhaling something long held in. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. People gathered not to celebrate, but to witness. There were no chants, no cheers, just silence. A justice long delayed had finally arrived, and its weight was sobering. The mood was not one of triumph, but of reckoning. A necessary verdict in a country too accustomed to verdicts denied. Sophie stepped out with her mother beside her, flanked by quiet security. The generals followed behind. No statements were given. The wind stirred the flags on the courthouse lawn. A few people bowed their heads as she passed. Cameras clicked. History moved forward by inches. 6 months had passed since the verdict, and the town of Greenville breathed a different kind of air. It wasn't louder or brighter or unrecognizable. The change was quieter, subtler, but real. In the same aging brick building where Sophie Johnson had once taught martial arts to restless teenagers, a new banner now hung above the entrance, the Sophie Johnson Center for Civil Preparedness and Legal Empowerment. The paint on the letters was fresh, bold against the weathered facade, a visible sign that the city remembered not just what had happened, but what it had learned. The center opened its doors to students from neighborhoods that had long lived in the shadows of suspicion. Teenagers arrived with folded arms and uncertain eyes, some drawn by curiosity, others by their parents' insistence. Inside, the classrooms were simple but purposeful. Posters detailed the steps to file a complaint. Against misconduct, shelves were stacked with guidebooks on constitutional rights. A mirrored room still held mats for physical training, but the lessons now began with discussion, not drills. The curriculum was designed not just to teach them how to protect their bodies, but how to defend their dignity. They learned the language of the law, how to film responsibly, how to remain calm during stops, and how to identify what could not be ignored. For many of them, it was the first time someone had said they were worth protecting, not just correcting. Sophie oversaw it all with the same steadiness that had once carried her through war zones. Her tone was measured, her presence grounding. She didn't raise her voice to be heard. She spoke so that people listened. On the day of the opening ceremony, the modest auditorium filled quickly. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of families, local officials, and curious reporters. In the back, standing quietly in a dark blazer, was General Robert Bailey. He avoided cameras. He offered no statements. He simply stood beside Sophie as she took the podium and addressed the crowd with a few measured words. There were no dramatic pauses, no grand declarations. She spoke plainly, her voice carrying the weight of truth. This center, she said, was not about her. It was about ensuring that no one should fear the street they walk on. After the event, she lingered for a moment in the corner of the main hall, watching the students talk with instructors and flip through lesson folders. She nodded occasionally, hands clasped behind her back. It was a quiet kind of fulfillment, the kind that didn't demand attention, only continuity. She no longer taught combat technique. Her days of striking pads and shouting commands had passed. Instead, she wrote articles on civil liberty for regional publications, gave lectures at nearby universities, and sometimes simply walked the length of the city's parks, settling on a bench to watch children run past with bright shoes and wild laughter. Her mother, once frail and silent, had regained much of her strength and could now be seen tending to a modest garden behind their house, surrounded by basil and sunflowers. Greenville itself had changed, not dramatically, but deeply. Body cameras became mandatory for the entire police department. Biannual psychological assessments were instituted for all active duty officers. A civilian review board, once just a proposal, was now fully functional. These shifts weren't perfect, They weren't revolutionary, but they were real, and they were permanent. Travis Miller no longer wore a badge. His appeal had been swift and fruitless. The court reaffirmed the conviction without hesitation. His name slowly faded from public conversation, reappearing only in legal documents and archived broadcasts. No one defended him anymore, and no one really remembered him, not as a man, only as a warning. Sophie's name, however, endured. It was etched not only on the building that bore her legacy, but in the syllabi of law classes across the state, in the speeches of activists, and in the casual conversations of parents teaching their children what to do when stopped on the street. Her story was recounted not with sensationalism, but with reverence. She had stood when others might have bowed, and she had not stood alone, because when she refused to be silenced, 4 generals had stood beside her, and a city had listened.